These are my top 5 board games of all time. They keep you on the edge of your seat. They push the standard of what board games used to be, and they just get you excited to play again. Wolfpack, this one's for you. You know that feeling when you're baiting people to come challenge you. They think that they have the upper hand, but in reality, it's all part of your plan, and they're falling right into your trap. That, my friends, is Blood Rage all day. You're controlling this clan of warriors, and you're recruiting monsters and gods, and you're fighting to gain the most amount of glory by the time that Ragnarok comes around and blows up village after village. Death isn't necessarily a bad thing in Blood Rage though, because sometimes you want that glorious death. Reason why is because when you die, you will score victory points, and it's all part of this whole plan, especially when you align with Loki. The goal is to become the most glorious Viking clan, and to do so, here's what you do on your turn. You can invade to bring warriors onto the map, you can march them across the terrain and upgrade leaders and ships and your clans. You can score big points with quests and pillaging. Pillaging is where you level up your stat bonuses to give you a bigger army, more glory for each battle, and more rage for you to play more cards and abilities. So what makes me keep wanting to play Blood Rage over and over and over again? One word: intensity. So here's the thing, look at this map. In this map, Yggdrasil is the center region. Okay, it's an area control game, which means you're fighting to control as much territory as you can. And in that center area, it invites everyone to come play because the center will give you the best rewards. It gives you one of each stat bonus. Of course, everyone's gonna want a piece of that pie. That's the really cool thing about Blood Rage because it caters to two different player bases. You can have passive players kind of pillage villages on their own and score points that way, but you can also have the warmongering players that are out to just fight everybody. And then you have players that fight for control over the middle. But as soon as someone fights for control of the middle, everyone around the table is involved, and it gets better every single round because once villages blow up, the map shrinks. Once the map shrinks, it becomes way more intense because everyone has bigger armies, yet a smaller map to play around with. So you can imagine that when someone fights for the middle, everyone gets involved, and there is just so much fun table talk that arises from that. There is definitely like a double-edged sword to Blood Rage though, because card drafting is super important, right? If you are a beginner and you have no idea how to play this game, it's gonna be very punishing because the card drafting is pivotal to every single round of the game. You really have to understand how cards interact with each other. And that's why I feel like if you ever play Blood Rage, you definitely have to give it multiple tries through in order for you to really understand how the cards play with each other. Banz introduced me to this game and I've never gone over it since, and I've been obsessed with trying to find all the missing pieces for a game that I should have pledged a long time ago. Blood Rage is definitely the best at like 4 players. I feel like that's where it really shines because then you have an equal distribution and I feel like a fair fight among the entire map. But then of course, when you have like 2 players, definitely nowhere near as much play interaction as you would need for an area control game like this. Now on the flip side, this is a game that is actually my most played game in my entire board game collection. I kid you not, I think I've had over 200 plays of Aquatica, and it also is the only game on this list that has 0 combat. I know you all know that I love combat, but hear me out here. Aquatica has some of the most insane combo generation that is incredibly satisfying. So in this game, you're sending out Sea Lords and they all have unique effects. These Sea Lords can recruit more Sea Lords, they can conquer and buy locations for you, and do a ton of other things. You get access to these manta rays, which will give you little boosts to your abilities. The locations, this is where the heart of Aquatica lies, because once you slide them into your player board, you get to utilize 1 depth, 1 visible circle on your turn once per turn. And then I can utilize all of my locations one time in order for me to do all kinds of things like recruit more characters, or score cards, or raise other locations. It is wild what you can do with Aquatica, and it plays amazingly across 2, 3, 4, and 5 player accounts. My favorite though, I will have to say, is at 2 players. I just feel like the pacing and the speed at 2 players, which is what I played it the most at, is incredibly satisfying because once you play one combo, you just want to keep finding more and more combos and just do that all day. It is just such a clever game and I feel so invested trying to outwit my opponent, aka Jackie, when we're playing this game back to back. Literally, it's one of the best board games that I've ever played and I just feel like I resonate with it so much on an emotional level too. And I wouldn't have found this game if it wasn't also for Tom Bassel. So Tom, if you're watching this video, thank you so much because Tom was actually the one who introduced me to this game back when I was making videos for Dice Tower. And I had a wonderful opportunity to make a tutorial for it on Dice Tower. And I feel like I would have never known that game if it wasn't for that. So Tom, thank you so much. It is a Dice Tower essential. Okay, we talked about an area control game that was best at 3 or more players. We dived into, literally, a game that was like uniquely amazing at 2 players and also really good across 3, 4, 5 players. But now we dive into a game for my solo gamers out there and my cooperative gamers out there. If I were to ever make a top solo gaming list, expect this to be number 1 as of the time of this video going live. Hear that? You know when a game has a soundtrack like that, you're in for a good one. I think about this game every single day. I kid you not, I low-key stare at the box, longing to open it up, set it up and play, and just sit there and enjoy the experience instead of working. Now in Oathsworn, you're playing as 4 characters who are trying to understand this darkness that's taking over the Deepwood. In the first part of the game, you're navigating through this insanely well-written story mode where you're making meaningful decisions and following along in this app and or physical book. You could do a little bit of both. And it takes you through an extremely well-written story. You know how sometimes when you play a campaign game and you just hear like the same old thing over and over again, like an ancient thing has awoken, or your job, your quest is to find this missing relic that's in a dark AF cave. I don't know. You get me, okay? You hear these cliche stories, but Oathsworn is nothing like that. The cool thing about Oathsworn is that it takes all of these twists and turns that you don't expect, and they matter because it will affect your party and like your health and your items as you go into the second part of the game, which is the encounter mode. The combat in this game is so wild. I still cannot rave about it enough ever since my last review about this, okay? So the combat, I want to mention again for people that aren't familiar with Oathsworn, but how combat works is you either draw cards or you roll dice. The combat mechanic here is just one of the best and most brilliant designs I've ever seen in a game, and I wish that Shadowborn Games did this in like a competitive scene. I know this is meant for specifically co-op and solo, but if they ever took that mechanic and put it into a competitive game, sign me up. I will be the first one waiting in line, waiting for that game. Now on top of that, the bosses that you fight, they're really intertwined with the story because the story will like hint at the type of boss that you're gonna be fighting, and the encounter itself is so beautifully structured because the more that you fight the boss and the more intense that they get, the more difficult that they become. Once you like break off different portions of their body, they become way more agitated and they will give you a very difficult time. At the same time, it's not too frustrating where you want to like rage quit and just stop playing the game, but it's a really good balance. And you can always like adjust the difficulty level too if it's too hard or if it's too easy for you too. Bottom line, Oathsworn is a once in a lifetime board game experience. If you ever get a chance to try this solo or cooperatively, it's gonna be such an amazing experience, hands down. Top tier storytelling, next level immersion, the way you build out your characters is phenomenal, and they even timed up this experience with a second printing, which I cannot wait to dive into. I can't get enough of this game, y'all. I freaking love this game. And that right there is my number 3, Oathsworn. Okay, we're at number 2 now, which I think may surprise you because this one skyrocketed the flip up my list. And I've been so addicted and obsessed with this game because every single time I play this game, it is a completely different and unique experience. Number 2, Root. Now in Root, you're playing as a woodland faction, and each faction has an extremely unique way of playing, performing all their actions that everyone has access to. Your goal is to score 30 points, but with it being such an asymmetric game, every faction will score differently. Now ultimately though, everyone has 3 phases: birdsong, daylight, and evening. In those phases, you get to build up your army, or build structures, or explore ruins, set up shops. There are just so many actions that your faction specializes in. That right there is what's so compelling about this game. Every time you play this game, you get to play as a different faction. With a different faction and all the combos that you play with, you're gonna have a totally different experience. Root is the definition of what an asymmetric game is, and also is the definition of what replayability can truly look like. It's about how your faction builds up. It's about how you utilize combat when you need to utilize it. Like, this game is a million times more fun. I'm gonna pick up the box again to reiterate this point. Root is a million times more fun because you have to think about sacrifice and combat and where you're allocating your warriors and how you're traversing across the map and how your abilities interact with everyone else's abilities. Root is so much fun because you have to focus on everything combined. And you honestly don't even know who your friends are until you play Root. And then you get to realize how hostile that they can be, how fun they can be, and how maybe even ruthless that they can be. Because don't let the beautiful artwork by Cal Farron fool you. This is a war game. And on a more serious note, Root does something that I feel like is such a feat that no other board game I can currently think of does as well as Root. And that is, it makes everyone put their phone down. Here's why. So when you're playing Root, you really have to understand what everyone else is doing, because in a lot of games, and including my number 1 game that I'm gonna talk about in a second, in a lot of games, you can just perform your actions on your turn and then it'll like cycle back to you, but then like what everyone else is doing, yes, it matters, but it may not matter to the extent that Root does, because if you don't pay attention to the other 3 players that are playing, the map and what happens and all their actions, from like setting up shops as the otters to exploring ruins, all of that has such a big impact on what you're gonna do next that you cannot take your eyes off this game. And it is amazing at de-influencing you to use your phone, because this is like one of the rare games where I see everyone at the table just completely invested and no one else is really like daydreaming. Bottom line, I just love how Root builds upon this foundation where what everyone does matters and you need to pay attention to everyone. Tell me another game where you can have passionate conversations about these over-the-top mice usurping rats and raccoons shooting arrows at lizards who are turning otters into cultists. Out of context, that can sound really bad. You know that feeling when you're teaching somebody and they're overwhelmed, but then as time goes on and the game goes on, their faces just light up because then they just get it. That right there is the satisfaction that you get with Root. Ugh, I love this game. Here we are. My number 1 board game of all time. You all think you have me figured out. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are guessing and you think that you know exactly what my number 1 board game is. Look, before I tell you what it is, I spent a lot of time thinking about this list, okay? Years, even. There's so much weight to those words, number 1 board game of all time. That board game is... Coming like a storm. I got my sword and my shield. Victory in my bones. A warrior never kneels. 'Cause I'm a gladiator and a shaker. Headed to the top 'cause I'm a groundbreaker. I'm gonna fight 'cause that's what everything that I could ever want in a board game is here. Elements, asymmetric factions, monsters. Monsters with sound bases. Absorbing those monsters' powers, air control, combat, wizards, dragons, warriors. Endgame conditions that just keeps everybody on their toes. You never know who's gonna win. Like, this is it. This is the end game. So for all of you who haven't heard me rave about this game at all on my channel, here's a 30-second snippet about how this game works. In this game, all you do is you place a unit. And once you run out of units, then you bring them all back. When you place a unit in different parts of Eldervale, different things happen, from collecting resources to gaining more magic cards to recruiting wizards and warriors and dragons to your army. And then when you bring them back, you activate a growing tableau. That's basically cards in front of you that have extremely thematic effects. Like if you start specializing in fire, then you can burn other people's resources. Or if you specialize in earth, then you start growing resources. And if you specialize in chaos, then you can roll a die and pray for good things to happen. Combat here, of course, is ridiculously fun because you start off with dice depending on how many units are involved in battle and the types of units that are involved, and also where your dwellings are. These are like little houses that are actually on your meeple, and they will also add to your dice in battle. And you can even spend swords to give you more dice in battle. Ultimately, the single highest die will win in combat, and then you can even add in magic cards like a lightning bolt, which will give you an auto 6, or a fireball, which will give you even more dice to add on. So magic spells become very integrated into this game, and there's just so much play interaction. Dwelling surprisingly has that Euro-esque feel to it. Don't let it deceive you and think that it's all about combat, because in reality, you can have a ton of other actions to choose from. If you want to be a passive player, you can cast spells which will literally stop battles. You can avoid monster contact. You can go all in and fight these monsters and gain those rewards. At the same time, you can be hyper-aggressive and you can be anywhere in between. So it caters to all players. Now let me answer this question: why is Dwellings of Eldervale my #1 board game of all time? Well, like Root, it has that asymmetric faction feel to it. Of course, nowhere near the extent of Root, but enough to make your faction feel very thematic and very immersive. Like Oathsworn, the combat is super satisfying and rewarding because then you get to build up your army, you get to fight monsters. I will say one particular downfall, even for my #1 favorite game of all time, one particular downfall for me is that when you spend a lot of resources to fight monsters, it's not as rewarding sometimes because then you would only gain one elemental absorbance, or you can also go up on the combat track. And to new players, it's pretty underwhelming because then they spend especially if they don't know how to play yet, they would spend in a whole army, like with dragons and warriors and a lightning bolt and everything to kill a monster, and the reward itself seems a little underwhelming. Right now, that's like my one gripe with Dwellings. I feel like you just need to understand how many resources you need to invest into fighting monsters because the rewards aren't as plentiful as I would like them to be. But other than that, I can rave about this game all day. Like Aquatica, the combo play here where you are gaining cards from the dungeon and mastering these different elements in your tableau is incredibly satisfying. And of course, like Blood Rage, the area control and epic combat scale is riveting. That's probably my favorite thing about Dwellings is the fact that you can choose which element to master, and it's not too restricting. I can be a Fire Witch Goblin, but I can get a bunch of water cards and chaos cards. And on top of that, you know how satisfying it is to get an orb and then use it to power up this dragon card, which gets you super, super rich and you can buy literally everything in this game. It's the best thing that you need to experience. Bottom line, Dwellings of Eldervale just checks so many fun boxes for me, from having that amazingly satisfying engine building to worker placement, my favorite mechanic, all those integrated so seamlessly together. It provides such a friggin' fun experience, and I cannot get over this game. And right now, there's just nothing that I can see dethroning it. And the kicker, it plays well across all player counts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I will say my favorite is 2 because it feels very chess-like. Place a unit, do things, bring them back, and I love that experience. I love the pacing of that one as well. But trust me, I will play it across every player account and it will still be extremely fun. All right, Wolfpack, I hope you all enjoyed my top 5 board games of all time. Let me know which games that you like down below, which games are you gonna check out. Was any of these games a surprise to you? Was #1 a surprise to you? Was it not? And should I do the next part, doing the top 10 games of all time, where I'm going from 5 through 10 this time? Let me know if you wanna see that down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And if you made it here to the very, very end, it's that time, y'all. Thank you so much for supporting me. If you're new here and you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And with that said, I will see you all in the next one.